I'm your host, Marcus Rowland. We will be covering the confrontation in Ukraine, climate change, and Michael Cohen. To start with the crisis in Ukraine, the Russian Navy and Ukrainian tugboats got into a minor engagement. Russian naval ships rammed into Ukrainian-owned tugboats. They were located in the Kerch Strait, a strait that the Russian and Ukrainian governments came to an agreement over to allow Ukrainian ships to pass through a small part of the strait. Ukraine claims that the ships were within the correct area, and the Russians instigated this event in order to create conflict. The Russians claim that the Ukrainians were intentionally sailing through Russian waters in order to create conflict. The Russians argue that the Ukrainian president would do this in order to boost his polling numbers by reminding the Ukrainians that he is their savior. The Ukrainian president vehemently denies this. This event is seen by the international community as part of the ongoing civil war between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed rebels. The Russian government claims that they are supporting ethnic Russians who are oppressed by the Ukrainians. There are large amounts of ethnic Russians in the conflict zone. However, there are also many ethnic Ukrainians. Most see this as a manufactured conflict, and Russia is trying to expand its territory. This crisis is underestimated. It truly is a civil war. This is a war of claiming the lives of thousands. The cause of this war is a false pretense of protecting ethnic Russians. It is in reality a war of territorial expansion. The Russian government wants better control of the Black Sea, a strategic place, as it is their only location for a world water port. Putin needs this port in order to project his and Russian power across the world. Now into our main topic, climate change. Climate change is a hot topic, with an ongoing debate that has kept people at odds for decades. On one side of the debate asserts that climate change is either not something to worry about because it is natural or something that does not exist at all. These people use personal experience such as claiming global warming does not exist because it is cold outside. Additionally, climate change skeptics use nitpicky climate change data to show no actual change in world temperatures. These are usually single pieces of data handpicked out of dozens and show that climate change does actually exist. Climate change deniers also use the argument of handful members of climate science who range from being paid by oil companies to underqualified. Climate change deniers are similar to arguments that supported lighted gasoline over 30 years ago, and like lighted gasoline, in hindsight, will look like a terrible idea. On the other side of the debate are those who support the idea of climate change and recognize that it is an ongoing crisis. These are people that range from the best of scientists to all but one of the G20 world leaders. The one standout, Donald Trump. The European Union recently announced plans to go completely carbon neutral by 2050. This is done by removing CO2 from the atmosphere as it is pumped in there. This is an ambitious plan. However, this will not be enough. In fact, according to most climate scientists, even if the world went carbon neutral, global temperatures would still rise. The only way it seems possible to avoid this is to remove CO2 from the air, faster than we put it in there. Currently, no one has concrete plans for doing this. Proposed ideas range from huge shrinking farms to industrial plants that pull out CO2 out of the air. At the moment, all of this seems either costly, worse for the environment, or both. The best thing that can be done at this time is to reduce CO2 as much as possible. There are other people that argue the economic viability of such environmental improvements. Many argue that climate change will naturally resolve itself as certain energy options become more available. Others argue that direct intervention is a necessary part of preventing climate change, despite the cost that it will have to an economy. These people also argue that the effect to the economy is outweighed by the job creation due to the new jobs created by renewable resources. I'd now like to turn to our panel for some debate on climate change. On my right, we have Nina and Sam, and on my left, we have John and Sean.
Howdy.
So I'd like to open it up for opening thoughts and statements on the topic of climate change.
I'll let my friends start.
Sorry.
Great. Well, it's real. I can tell you that. And a very large misconception that many people have is the difference between weather and climate. And the weather is everyday events, such as if it snows outside, just like on a Thursday or something. And the climate is, say, the seasons. Just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, climate is long-term weather patterns.
Do you have anything to refute, or?
Well, no, because my position has always been that I believe in climate change. I just don't think that the economic costs are worth it in the long run.
Worth trying to stop climate change? Is that
yeah,
what you mean?
worth trying to prevent it from happening, it would hurt the working people of this country and the world more than if we were to try to combat it.
Well, can I say something? So I'm just thinking like humanity dug itself into a hole with climate change because we, during like the Industrial Revolution and like factories, like emitting such like massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, it's not something that's ever going to be like economically beneficial, but it's something that's beneficial to society. You know what I mean?
So you believe in the needs of society over necessarily the need of the economy?
Yeah.
Also, money isn't going to matter if we're all dead underwater.
Well, we're not going to be dead underwater. We're talking about at most like inches every 100 years of sea level rise. Like that
Well,
is
yes,
completely.
but then there's also the atmosphere and the whole world getting hotter and
By 2
mosquitoes.
degrees, that's going to kill us all?
No, but the mosquitoes coming with different diseases
The
might.
mosquitoes. See, like that's an interesting argument, but the fact remains that healthcare has become increasingly better since the discovery of penicillin, and malaria and all these other things are mainly problems in underdeveloped countries, which as they become economically more viable, those diseases will become less of a threat.
Well, climate change also affects ocean currents, which essentially drive the weather on Earth, which basically means like if climate, like an increase in 2 degrees can drive
It's
much more devastating natural disasters.
like
Especially with El Nino.
the hurricanes that we've been having more recently is.
The hurricanes we're having, combating climate change now will do nothing to prevent them because these are an effect of the carbon already in the air. If we stop it, they'll be just as bad.
There have been.
Yeah, but we're preventing them from
We
getting
could
worse.
prepare with infrastructure.
But we can build infrastructure to help prevent them.
and then
you
we could
make
save money because of the infrastructure, which also opens up more jobs.
Yeah, so you can build like shelters and stuff and improve a country's infrastructure. If that's what you want to do with combating climate change, you can do that naturally just by allowing economies to grow and people to develop their countries.
By reducing carbon emissions, the point is essentially no one's taking carbon out of the air, at least at this point. The goal is to stop emitting so much into the air at a disproportionate level. And so by doing that, like I said before, like you're not trying to reduce climate change, you're trying to slow it down because it's already happening.
The EU recently released a proposition that they were going to become carbon neutral by 2050. Would that be something that you'd be more open to?
Well, something that needs to happen for this is if you're going to have the world combat climate change, which I'm not sure is needed, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to have a global thing that has clear standards and
Like a Paris climate?
well, no, not like a Paris climate thing, because that deal literally did nothing. It did nothing. It was a paper guarantee. The U.S. was going to basically just tank their economy combating climate change, while every other developed nation and developing nation set estimates that were below what they were already like expected to meet by those years. It was only the U.S. was the only country that made serious concessions, let's say, and it would hurt us in the long run.
The
And
countries set their limits. You do know that, right? Like we set our own limits in the agreement.
yeah,
It was just these are the guidelines. So anything that the United States was doing that was so-called hurting us, we were doing to ourselves.
well, no, those things would hurt us in the long run because what they do is you're right, it was set by the U.S., by the U.S. president, and they hurt the American working class. That's what these regulations do by throwing people out of industries, throwing them out of jobs, like the coal industry. That's what they do. They like destroy industries that Americans are working in. And
But if
That's
you
not
build
something
the infrastructure because of climate change and all the awful storms that are arising from it, you open up more jobs and then there's more consumers and it floods back into the economy.
I'm not sure how. I'm not following the logic there, because I see what we were doing with the Paris Accord, which was we're going to cut this and it's going to have a 350 billion cost, let's say. I believe it was bigger, but I'm not entirely sure. That would throw hundreds of thousands of Americans out of jobs in their industries, destroy probably our manufacturing sector, And it's by saying we're going to build infrastructure, all those jobs that are lost are not going to come back to do that. Americans will be put out of work. More will be put out of work than those created in your infrastructure
I'm
field.
confused how you mean that creating and investing in infrastructure will make people lose more jobs.
No, I'm saying the cost. So you'll obviously add jobs when when building infrastructure. But you'll lose more than you make, is what I'm saying.
But how so?
What do you mean, how so? You're destroying entire industries to build roads.
These industries are destroying the world
That
and us
That's false.
in it.
These industries are globally, they're what's allowing developing countries to get out of poverty. That's what they're doing. Because like it or not, coal and natural gas and all these stuff, they're pretty cheap in comparison to solar and wind. Now, my position is what I think is you just allow the economics to do its course. Eventually, what I believe is you'll have a day where wind and solar are cheaper to use as energy than coal and natural gas. And on that day, all countries will automatically switch to these developing resources because it's cheaper. No one's using coal just because for the sake of using coal. They're using it because it's the cheapest alternative. So what you need to do is you need to develop these technologies so that they can compete economically with coal and natural gas. That's how if that's what you want to do to fight climate change, you can do that. But just to restrict and put costs on the American people for the sake of it, I don't see that as a good alternative.
I don't entirely disagree with what you said, but the way I see it is that there's almost two different schools of thought, and one is what you said, which is actually is a viable possibility to eventually let development further and advance the effectiveness of solar power and wind power to reduce its cost. But I think a lot of people also, what they want is a shock effect type of that, where immediately everyone drops coal and goes straight to solar. And in the short term, it will obviously be detrimental to the global economy, but long term, it most likely will balance out. But I think if you're talking about playing the safe route and just making sure the economy is stable pretty much throughout the whole process, what you actually propose, a gradual transition, is actually most effective. I agree with that.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will have to pick this up at a later date. On to our next topic, the recent developments with the Mueller investigation. Michael Cohen was charged and convicted of illegal use of campaign funds on behalf of President Donald Trump. This occurred before Trump was sworn in. Cohen is now a convicted felon and has been sentenced to 3 years in prison. This case includes references to an individual one who is most likely Donald Trump. This could have serious ramifications and lead to an impeachment process for the president. After much silence, the special counsel Mueller is starting to release new, more terrifying information that is once again exciting the president. Nothing has been confirmed yet, but it could become more problematic for the president. And again, Cohen could have been acting on his own, and Trump may have no knowledge about what happened, thus keeping his hands clean. It is as much about what happened as it is about Mueller's ability to prove that something did happen. In the end, this might just be the thorn in the side of the president. Some argue that whatever happened between the president, Michael Cohen, and Stormy Daniels would have no effect on the opinions of the voter at all, thus making the story irrelevant. Whatever the case may be, it will be interesting to see the outcome in the near future. I'd now once again like to turn to our panel for some debate on Michael Cohen. So I'd like to open it up to everyone's first thoughts on the recent developments with Michael Cohen and his being charged with a felony.
Well, I think it's kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but I'm sure my friends disagree. Sean, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I feel it doesn't really relate to the campaign enough for it to be really effective on our current president.
I'm sure you have thoughts that differ.
Honestly, I kind of agree. It is relatively what's the word you used?
Irrelevant?
Yeah, it is irrelevant. I feel the only significance that it really has is he was trying to hide something, Trump was, and if he's hiding this, what else could he be hiding?
Yeah, it's just kind of like the classic argument. If you're kind of like if the Department of Justice or like, well, not the Department of Justice, but like if everybody around Trump is like being found guilty of something like related to campaign finance or like things involving the presidency, like eventually you think, obviously they're encircling Trump, like he's the source of it. You know what I mean?
Do you think that that the people around him will eventually lead to not information about him being guilty of some crime?
Honestly, I think Robert Mueller already knows so much. Like, obviously, he's not telling the public everything he knows, but he already definitely knows so much that's incriminating. And he's definitely working. I mean, he's been working with Michael Cohen. He's been working with, like, I think it was like American Media Inc., who was also involved. They made a donation that was like not according to regulation, and he's been gathering information from them for months, and he definitely has some tricks up his sleeve.
However, I don't believe we're going to hear anything about it during Trump, like the end of Trump's reign or anything. We'll probably hear about it years later. I mean, just given like Jeff Sessions
Trump has
resigning.
at minimum 2 more years and at most another 6 as president. So we could definitely hear about something between now and then.
Yes, but I doubt it will be acted on, as there's been so many things against Trump that have not been acted on, such as the 19 sexual assault allegations, one being his wife, but she took it back. Ex-wife.
Well, on the issue of Trump's infidelity, everyone, the question is if this would have changed the minds of the voters at all. And with the Stormy Daniels payoff, I honestly don't, because as you said, there were 19 or so allegations out there, and people knew he was a bad guy with women. They just thought he was better than Hillary for the country, and I think that
The thing that I'm more interested in isn't necessarily what would have changed the public's mind. 2 years ago now. It's what would have, like, what he's done to become president. So Michael Cohen being convicted of a felon is more, it leads more to Trump having committed an actual crime.
Well, I don't think necessarily. It depends. The context matters. So if Trump went to Michael Cohen and said, Stormy Daniels has approached us and said she's going to come out and make an allegation, make this go away, and Michael Cohen then goes and commits campaign finance reform, I don't think you could put that on the president, because he obviously doesn't know the intricacies of the law. If Trump were to go out there and say, okay, you need to go commit campaign finance fraud, hide this from the public, and then do that, that'd be a different story. But even then, it'd be comparable. It wouldn't be an impeachable offense in my view. It'd be much like the case of John Edwards back in 2008, where he paid off a mistress before the election and he wasn't found guilty or did any jail time.
So you're arguing that it wouldn't be an impeachable offense?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I agree. I don't think it would impeach him.
I think it just adds to like his whole, like, people on like the left are always like talking about his whole, like, I mean, I don't like him, but like people on the left are always talking about he's such a terrible person, like all this, and to them I think it just adds to that. But I also think on the flip side, to like the right, and specifically like more like past the centrist and like to the farther right, like it would strengthen their faith in him, because they think like the world is out to get him.
Yeah. So
Well, I mean, it doesn't help when the New York Attorney General elect comes out and says she's going to specifically target members of Trump's family. I mean, that plays
Well,
right
I mean,
into his hand.
according to like information though that was given by Michael Cohen to the DA's office, like there was some report that they released right after his sentencing,
So-
and it specified a number of other individuals who were unnamed in the report that like would go into further investigation.
Well, what you have is it seems to me like in New York, it could be a case of selective prosecution, and where they're specifically targeting the president because he's the president and a Republican. Like, And that's for me what makes it dicey, because if I could see it becoming like a fruit of the poisonous tree type of thing, where the president may have done something wrong, but because the process was kind of disregarded in order to get him, in the end, it's not worth it. And I could see defending the president, and if it becomes a situation like that.
Final thoughts, anyone?
Sean?
I don't have any thoughts there.
All right.
10 out.
That was
Well, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you later on.